My aim of this video is to answer what are agentic systems, and in particular, what an AI agent is. I've had several people recently tell me they really have no idea what it is. So I'm hoping this video is at least helpful to give you how I think about agentic systems and how I would define AI agents. I will tell you, there is a lot of misconception over what an AI agent is. And I think it's very important that we start kind of landing on a definition that makes sense to everyone. So I'm pulling up this blackboard, and what I'm hoping to do is diagram out some of this in a way that's easy to understand. But I think there's something to kind of understand before we get into the AI stuff. And if you're not in software, you may not actually have thought about it in this way before. So there's something that we always talk about, which is the job to be done. This is how you make money in software. You basically end up building something that does a job. You can make the coolest application, the coolest software in the world, but it doesn't actually do something. You're not actually going to sell the software because ultimately you have some human that wants to accomplish some goal. And if your software does that and does it easier than this human has been doing it before, maybe they save time, they'll be happy. And then they will actually pay money for that. Now, the way that we think about agentic systems is pretty easy to kind of understand. You can kind of think about it like this linear line. And what I'll say over here is there is no clear cutoff, but I do have my own opinion on when this actually becomes an agentic system or not. So if we look at this, the line that kind of defines a system, this is a software system. Over here, there's no AI at all in there, right? There's absolutely none. And then we start getting over here, maybe we've got applications that do like single LLM calls. And I'll give you some examples of that here in a minute. Then we start getting over here and we have AI agent workflow. And I'll go through the definition of this in more particular. And then we have the Holy Grail, which is autonomous. These are, I can't spell today. These are autonomous agentic systems. And what I like to think is right around here is really when an agentic system becomes a thing. And this is important to remember because there are a lot of people that are calling things that have very like light AI agentic systems, and that's not correct. An agentic system focuses on what we talked about above here, the job to be done. We have to accomplish a particular goal. So a great example of an application that will use, say that they're using an AI agent, is let's say that you have a text box. And in here you have some amount of text. But what they have is just like, let's say they've got like a button here that allows you to call an LLM that will give you some ideas for what's in this box. I've seen people call this an AI agent. And this text box is one small piece of a bunch of data that needs to be put together, right? So we've got images, and maybe we've got um, documents that need to be in there, or maybe there's other text boxes. But basically, we call an LLM, and it returns back a simple like message, and then the user can choose to use that or not. This is really where I start putting it is on this area right here. Start thinking about right here is what this application is doing. Doing a single LLM call. It's enhancing the application, but this isn't the job to be done. The job to be done is not to complete or fill in this text box. The job to be done is probably format all this data to send an email or generate a document. That's the job to be done. This is not an agentic system. What is an agentic system? You start getting into it at the lower level, which is the AI agent workflow. And then we move into the autonomous AI, which is, I like to call the holy grail of AI applications, which are actually pretty rare in reality out there. Before I can really define these two, what I wanted to actually break it down to is what is an AI agent itself? And I like to think about the AI agent in three ways. So we can think about this being the agent right here. And the agent actually has three abilities. They have perception, they can make decisions, and they can take an action. And these three things are very important for an agent. Think about it from a single LLM call. A single LLM call, you can give it context, so that could be its perception. It can make decisions, but typically it can't take an action. So you miss out on a lot of that. Now, behind the scenes, you might be interacting with an agent. So the LLM may actually have agents behind the scene that utilize tools like web search. But anyway, let's jump into basically perception. I think it's important to think about what perception actually is here. The perception is, you could think about this as like just tons of data getting put in. This might be video. I'm starting to see this more and more. This might be context. You just passing text in. This might be images that is going in. Basically, the model is giving so much stuff. This might even be the ability to, which I'll kind of talk about this a little bit, but this could be like a web search. Maybe it goes and gets its own data, right? Because it has part of the world knowledge at its hand. And the more data that it can actually consume, the better that that model could potentially do to make decisions. Heck, it might even be RAG. If you're not familiar with that, this is something where you're able to take a bunch of your own documents and turn it into something that the model can now go search for. This is like, it's got all of this context of the world. It's training data, right? It's got all of this stuff that it can perceive. It's like its eyeball into everything that we've got there. Um, and maybe just worth just noting a little bit here. It's like tool data, because there's like a million things that I actually use this for. I might actually have it actually go grab data from a database or call an API and stuff like that. I think it's important to really think about perception as being just a way to get data, just absolutely a way to get data. And then the second thing that we talked about was make a decision. This one is probably the most hardest one to kind of explain in a way. But what ends up happening, I like to think about this like this. So you've got inputs into the model. So when you call a single LLM, you basically are feeding it data of some kind. It has all of its previous context and everything that it's built into through the chat. Uh, and then ultimately you have some sort of prompt. Maybe you've uploaded a document and now you've got it telling it to do something with that document. And there's some sort of rules, and these can be guided by you and the LLM provider. And based on all of this, some decision is made. Now, what is that decision? You could think about it like maybe it solved the problem. The simplest one is, how many R's is there in the word strawberry? It takes all the data that it has, the prompt, the rules, and it decides that there are two, which is wrong, and then it fixes it and says there's three. It's just kind of funny. Maybe it actually builds a summary. Maybe it decides like priority. Maybe it picks the best strategy. So I think you get the point here. Making a decision is ultimately taking everything that is perceived, now making a decision. Like, it's not doing anything yet, but it is deciding what to do. Then we get over to the really cool part, which is the action. And this is what makes an AI agent so freaking powerful. What if you want to create a hotel reservation? Like you're actually doing the job to be done, right? You're actually able to do the thing. But it doesn't have to be the end thing. The action could also be run Python code. And I see a lot more AI actually doing this. And I think it's something I've actually played around with this myself to be able to like autonomously build an application and have the AI test it behind the scenes. And you're seeing GitHub Copilot doing, maybe not actually running the code for you, but it's doing like this multi-step process of the action, which is generating the code. And this is the part where I think a lot of people miss it. They'll call things an AI agent that aren't actually taking an action. It could even be something as simple as like putting a record in the DB, which is the database. I want to do all of this and decide if that should go in the database. I want, in like my AI book writer, I want to write a chapter. I'm actually going to do the work to write a chapter. So now that you've got kind of this understanding of action, making decisions, perception, you can kind of understand the idea of what an agent actually is. What we need to go to now is the idea of the agentic systems. And I like to break this up into two categories. We have the agentic workflow, and these are the most common that I would say in software today. And there's a reason for it. It's because they're easier to test. And the reason for that is you have a little bit more control on them. And what I mean by that is, let's just say that there's like a sequence of things. If you're familiar to what workflow means, it's like step one, da da da, two, da da da, three, and so on. Now, if you do this in an agentic workflow system, you might have, um, let's say this is an app. This is your application. It interacts with an agent. That agent has some output. You verify that. It goes back to the app, and then it goes back to an agent, and it goes back to an app, and so on until you are done. Like I have some that are about 14 steps to accomplish certain goals that I've built. But what's nice about this is the application can verify the step all the way through. So if there is an error, you can then send it back to retry and keep the flow going well. The downside to this is it can take a really long time, but not as long as the autonomous system, because this one you at least have control over how long it takes. But so this one's like more consistent in how it's actually executed. You can actually get a pretty good understanding, or at least a good range. You'd be like greater than 45 seconds, but maybe less than 70. You know what I mean? Like you have a range for it. So what's the other thing that I'd want to say here is this one is just easier to maintain. So we're going to put two here, easier to maintain. None of these systems are easy to maintain, but this one is easier to maintain than the fully autonomous system because this one you can very clearly control every bit of data. Let's make this a different color here. So you're passing data between these, and you have full control over every bit of data that goes through each step here. And if you want a great example of this, my AI book writer that I built is awesome because you have like the world builder. I'm just gonna do that. Then you have the character builder, and you have the outliner, and then you have the writer, and you have the editor. And see how easy this is to kind of think about that how the agents interact with each other. Then between each of these, we have actually the application taking action here, here, here. And we've got lots of steps, and I can control if a chapter fails, right? It just comes back the editor right here. Like, oh, let's just go back. We'll redo that chapter. It didn't generate properly. And my book rate is a little bit more complicated than that, but you can kind of get the idea about how these workflow systems work. And these are agentic systems in my mind. And just to go back to the original line that we drew up here, this is here. And there's different degrees of this, right? So there isn't like this hard cutoff to what an agentic system is. There is this degree of it. Like I've seen very simple AI agent workflows. The goal is something that does the job to be done, the thing the human needs to accomplish. And that could be anything from generating a video, generating an email, making a marketing campaign, setting up an ad campaign, you name it. It's whatever the human wants to accomplish. But let's jump into the Holy Grail. Now, this is the autonomous. And this one is one that I think a lot of people just assume that all agentic systems are, but this is just not the case. And in fact, there's very few cases of this that I actually know about that actually are running in production that are consistent. I would say things like O3 Mini, things that are actually doing a bunch of like O3 Mini with that deep research that they've got. I'd say things like that probably are kind of autonomous, but really, I'm betting behind the scenes it's more of a workflow. I bet they have a step where they're like, okay, go gather data. They get that data, they make sure the format's good. All right, go do this, go do that. So I'd be willing to bet that there's like some portion of autonomy, but then also mostly workflow oriented. So this would be the example of, hey, I have some product manager. This is the way I like to think about it. And I have a series of workers that I can utilize. And maybe that's a lot of them, right? So maybe I have dev 1, I have a designer, I have a dev 2, I have dev 3. And the product manager knows the goal. And typically I usually call this like the manager when I'm building these systems. The goal with these autonomous systems is you give some manager the goal. They have agents that they can rely on that they can put out to have work done. And ultimately, all of these have tools available to them. I've built some that had as many as like 13 tools, 13, 14 tools, and then each of them have various access depending on their job. Like a designer wouldn't need to actually write code, but a dev wouldn't necessarily be able to do that, right? And you might even have someone that's like testing, a QA, right? And it doesn't have to be oriented around code because the other example that I've actually built is that board game. I made a video on my channel a while back around building a board game design. The idea was, can I autonomously give it an idea for a board game, have it go through and basically simulate the gameplay, write the game design document, edit the game design document, and decide when it's done. You have all of these agents working together, talking to each other. And I decided to visualize this. And what I found is it's so odd. Like sometimes you get agents like passing data in the oddest flows possible. And this is what makes these systems hard because you're going to run this 3 times and your path through is going to be very different. And remember, this is an overly simplified one. And some of the ones that I would do, like they call each other back and forth multiple times. And the path becomes really, really tricky to kind of manage. So autonomous systems are very hard, like very hard to test. And I would say what you may end up having is like sporadic, very sporadic results. What makes this so sporadic is it might work 3 times, and then it will fail 1 time. And usually what I'll find is it might work 1 time and fail 10 times because it's so you're relying on these like autonomous bodies to decide how to get the job done. So, summary here. I want to just say there's a lot of people that really don't understand what AI agents are meant to do, but there's some really cool places to go and test them. So in really cool. Uh, Replit, but there's also things like AutoGen, which is what I prefer to kind of work with. LangChain. There's lots of frameworks that are starting to pop up around this that you could go and find. There's one that I'm actually using. I'm trying to remember the name of it. But anyway, there's so many to play around with. So you can go check any of them out. Some of these no-code ones are kind of cool if you're not a coder. That'd be great if you just kind of play around with it. Be careful though. There are a lot of people that will like put out something saying they built an AI agent with N8N, but it's kind of, I'd say, more on the left side of that line that we drew. And just it really depends on the job to be done. Just remember that like an agentic system has a job to be done that is it's not just a simple replaces text. It needs to be the job that the human needs to accomplish. And I like to think about it, it's like, is it something that you would pay for? So agentic systems are complex. They are not these simple, like just API calls. They have access to tools, and they can be highly brittle. And it almost has changed the paradigm of how coding works because when you're working with these systems, testing them isn't it's just like following acceptance criteria because you now have to deal with this unknown, like black box where data is getting fed in and you don't know what the output's always going to be. But I will say it's getting better, especially with some of the structured output. You can kind of control it more. I prefer right now for production software building uh, workflow oriented agentic systems. And the reason for that is it's just more controllable. So the workflow ones, I think, are the ones that you can do very complex jobs to be done. And the final thing I'll say is just remember the 3 things that make up an agent or an agent. And those things are the things that we talked about at the beginning. They are the ability to perceive, so perception. They are decisions, being able to make decisions of some kind. And the big one, which is actions. Honestly, this is the piece that's probably the most important. You have to build your systems when you're building agentic systems that they have the ability to do things for you. It doesn't make sense to call something an agentic system if it's not doing the job. All right, I hope this has been helpful. I'd love to see if you, like, one, agree with me here, or two, do you have another definition? Because there is a lot of people that I think believe agentic systems mean something different than I described here. But I do think it's important for us to all kind of get on the same page. And when we're talking to people about it, we're not calling things AI agents just for the sake of AI agents. So if you were wondering what AI agents were, what agentic systems are, hopefully this video has been helpful. If you made it this far, I apologize so much for my handwriting, but I do really enjoy kind of like thinking through, talking through the topic a little bit. And I'd love to know kind of this format. Is it something that you guys want me to continue to do or not? Anyway, if you like this, please like and subscribe. And until next time, peace out.